programme. The island of Orkney is more isolated than almost anywhere in Britain. 45 minutes by ferry from John O'Groats off the northern tip of Scotland. It's not the sort of place you'd expect to see a major crime. And when one happened there this summer, it was a crime that would have been extraordinary anywhere.
Would you like to sit down? Now, what would you like to drink tonight?
Okay, I think I remember who's got what. One chicken tikka. One lamb tikka.
I ordered that.
Very good. And who's the chicken chat?
Oh, that's mine, thanks.
Keep away! Bloody shoot us too!
When the gunmen came in, it looked like a fancy dress. When the gun went off and I realised it wasn't, it was a horrible thought to have your children there and not be able to do anything about it.
Shamsuddin Mahmood was 26 and from a large and successful family. This was his second time working at the restaurant in Kirkwall, having seen the job advertised in London.
We're the murder, the Mummiatas Indian Restaurant.
Bridge Street, Kirkwall.
I want you to preserve the scene, Bob. Make sure nothing's disturbed. I'll get an inquiry team together and get to you as soon as possible. The Northern Constabulary covers a vast area. Orkney hadn't had a murder for 25 years, and it was necessary to provide support from the mainland. A helicopter wasn't available to me, making it necessary to travel by road 150 miles from Inverness to John O'Groats. We then had to travel by ferry across the Pentland Firth. That's the nature of policing in the Highlands and Islands. So how is the Holmes computer link to the mainland going?
It's almost ready, sir.
And what do we know about Mr. Mahmood, Angus?
We know that he's been on the island for about 6 weeks. He was here last year for about 9 months, and at that time he was also working in the Mummiatas restaurant.
Anything more you would like?
Not meantime.
Not just now?
He has no enemies that we can find, and we do know he has got a brother who lives in London.
He was a very brilliant student. The family wanted him to carry on with his studies. We cannot think why it should have happened to him. He was a very kind-hearted person. The sad thing is that he got killed at a time when he was about to go home and get married to his girlfriend.
We require teams to carry out inquiries at our airport and ferry terminals, to conduct house-to-house investigations in Kirkwall, and to re-interview all of our main witnesses.
Right, Marianne, what I want you to do for me is just if you could go over the events that happened in the restaurant, just in your own words.
I was showing 2 customers to the table, and I was just about to go back up to the bar for the menus when the door opened behind me, and I turned round to see who it was. And a man with a mask on came in. At first I thought it was a joke, but then I saw the gun in his hand as he went past me. He went up to the table where Shamel was serving the customers, and I heard a shot. I thought he was in to shoot everyone. And I had the door open behind me, and he came out and went down the other lane. And the last I saw him was going down the narrow lane at the back of the restaurant.
We were driving down Junction Road at about 7:15, and as we turned into the car park, I saw a guy out of the window on my left. He had on dark clothes and had mossy brown hair.
As you're aware, the man that went into the restaurant was wearing a hooded sweat top, and he had a distinctive stoop. Down here at Junction Road Toilets, which is just down behind the restaurant, at about 7:10, we have a sighting of a man hanging about outside the toilets shortly before the murder.
Well, I was driving along Junction Road, heading towards the pier, and I was about to turn into the Albert Street car park when I noticed this chap just outside the door of the toilets on my left. He was wearing a hooded top, and I noticed he was wearing a balaclava underneath that.
Also, there was someone who saw a man walking from the direction of the toilets across the road in the direction of the restaurant.
George, the people of Orkney are very concerned about this murder. How can they help you with your inquiries?
I'm keen for anyone who was in Kirkwall on the day of the murder and who may have seen anything suspicious to come forward.
Can you tell me what time of day that was at?
It was about 5:10, and I was about to go down the lane past the Mama's restaurant when this guy got down in front of me, and he turned to stare at me, which I thought was quite frightening at the time. The way he held his arms was like a bodybuilder. He was in his 20s, about 28 I would say, and his height would have been about 5'8" to 6 feet.
This sighting is of particular interest because of the similar physical characteristics to the person seen in and around the restaurant. But at the end of the day, we still haven't established a motive for this crime.
I'm always looking for an exit.
Daddy, I can't sleep.
It's okay, Daddy will take you through and tuck you in.
The effect it's had on our family since the incident is one of distrust. We have had difficulty going out in the evenings. Things are getting better now, and we hope the kids are getting back to normal. It's difficult to take in such a horrendous event.
George Goff, in the 4 months since this happened, you've obviously made extensive inquiries in the Orkneys. Now, how can a national appeal help?
Well, we hope to reach the people of Orkney with a visual reconstruction through Crimewatch, which may help to jog their memories. Also, of course, the programme will reach the remainder of Britain, where we hope to contact anyone who has been on holiday in Orkney. Orkney, and Kirkwall in particular, has a very industrious holiday trade in the summer.
Now, I know you haven't got a motive, but there was a possibility of motive in as much as the day before the murder there was a sighting of an argument going on at the restaurant, at the door of the restaurant.
Yeah, that's correct. About 8:30 the night before the murder, witnesses described to us that two people were arguing with the now deceased Shamsuddin Mahmood outside the restaurant in the doorway of the restaurant. Now that may have an innocent explanation, but our inquiry has failed to trace these people.
Now, that was Wednesday the 1st of June. If we roll back 2 weeks, there was another sighting, this time rather more remarkable, in woods which are part of the town. Describe what happened there.
Well, it's an area known as Parkdale Woods, which is within the town of Kirkwall. Our witnesses described to us that a man was carrying out what appeared to be commando manoeuvres within the woods for no obvious good reason. Again, that might be an innocent pastime, but we would like to hear from the person to have it explained.
Obviously, then, we also need to find any other witnesses to the man outside the public lavatories. And we should explain that while we were filming, it was raining. Actually, the day of the murder, the 2nd of June, it was one of the hottest evenings of the year. Yeah. So his dress would have been most extraordinary, having a collar up, let alone a balaclava.
That's correct. The weather was so good that there's no good reason for having a hood up.
And the bodybuilder in the alleyway, now there's really nothing much to connect him with the crime. You really want to eliminate this man.
Again, as we've seen from the reconstruction, this man is of great interest to us, and unfortunately our inquiries to date have failed to trace him, and he hasn't come forward. If he recognises himself from the programme and is prepared to come forward with an explanation, that will be very helpful.
Okay. Well, if you live in Kirkwall or if you were in Orkney at the time, please call if there's any way in which you can help. The number is 0500 600 600. That's a free call number in the studio, 0500 600 600. Or you can ring the Orkney Incident Room. That's on 0856 872 076.
In one of the most remote corners of the British Isles, a hooded assassin carries out what appears to be a contract killing. The murder remains unsolved for more than 10 years before a British Army war hero is charged with the killing. In an exclusive interview, his father says he's innocent.
That's what I've said from day one, and that's what I'm still saying.
In one of the strangest murder mysteries of recent years, the man accused of this cold-blooded execution was at the time no more than a schoolboy. But one who grew up to be a deadly sniper, who knew how to handle fearsome weapons.
At close range, it's quite devastating.
And who hatched an incredible plot to escape when Judgment Day finally came.
He suddenly leapt over the dock.
The Orkney Islands, north of the Scottish mainland, have a unique and sometimes violent history. Early settlers left behind these remarkable monuments 5,000 years ago. Many centuries later, Viking warriors invaded and ruled the islands. Nowadays, the 20,000 inhabitants of Orkney live in one of the most peaceful, almost crime-free communities in the world. It's hard to keep secrets where everyone knows your face, and there's nowhere to run without taking a boat or plane. Catherine Turnbull was editor of the local newspaper here.
The crime list for the week would be a wing mirror knocked off a car, or perhaps somebody speeding or being done for drink driving, that sort of thing. Violence didn't really enter into it unless there might be an odd scuffle outside a pub, you know, on a Saturday night.
On the evening of Thursday, the 2nd of June 1994, violence came to Orkney in an almost unthinkable fashion.
It was 7 o'clock-ish. At that time of the year in June, it was sunny, blue sky. It was a very bonny evening, as they would say in Orkney.
Inside the island's only Indian restaurant, in Orkney's main town, Kirkwall, diners had just settled down to an early evening meal.
There were several families with young children. Suddenly the door burst open. Somebody walked in with a long stride, wearing a balaclava, and had a gun. He walked up to a table. The waiter was serving them, and he came in, gun to the head. Shot, walk out.
The victim was 27-year-old Shamsuddin Mahmood, known as Shamal, a Bangladeshi and one of only a handful of Asians living in Orkney. Fired from less than a foot away, the bullet entered his left eye, passed right through his head, and lodged in the restaurant wall. He died almost instantly.
It happened so quickly, I don't think anybody had a clue, even after it had happened, what actually had happened.
There'd been no murder in Orkney for 25 years, let alone what looked like a cold-blooded professional execution. Solving this crime fell to one of Britain's smallest police forces, the Northern Constabulary, who cover a vast area of the Highlands and Islands from their headquarters in Inverness.
The primary evidence at the scene was the bullet itself, which was embedded in the wall behind Mr. Mahmood, and also the bullet casing that had fallen from the gun after it had fired the bullet.
This single bullet casing was the best lead police had. David Dyson is a lawyer and firearms expert who's testified in many murder trials.
The fact that there's a cartridge case at the location indicates immediately the use of a self-loading pistol, something of this kind. The cartridge case is ejected from this port. An ejector mechanism pulls the empty cartridge case from the chamber and throws it out of the side of the pistol. If we consider a revolver, the cartridges are loaded into the revolver cylinder, and when the gun's fired, each cartridge is retained within the cylinder. So when the gunman leaves the scene, he takes not only the gun, but he takes the fired cartridges with him. So that immediately tells us that we're looking at a self-loading pistol, and there's a lot of information that can be gained from that cartridge case.
Every cartridge case carries telltale markings, similar to a hallmark on a piece of jewellery.
Manufacturers will put their own marks on the head of the cartridge case. That's referred to as a head stamp. It will normally include the caliber, and quite often with military ammunition, you'll also find a date code stamped on it as well.
The local policeman who knew most about guns was an ex-soldier, Constable Eddie Ross.
I've been involved with shooting and firearms most of my life. I was a member of the local club. Initially, my role when I came on shift in the morning was to basically guard duty outside the restaurant. There was police tape up here and there, and I just had to stop people passing the front of the restaurant. Some of the scenes of crime people asked if I would come in and have a look at a casing that was lying on the floor. I agreed to do this and had a look at it.
Eddie Ross's expert eye quickly picked out the critical information.
I could see right away that it was of a 9mm caliber. Took a note of the markings on the base of the cartridge case, and it indicated that the round of ammunition had been made in the Kirki arsenal in India.
The Indian-made bullet was one of a huge consignment of 54 million, purchased by the British Army more than 20 years earlier, in 1972. But there was something highly unusual about this particular batch of bullets.
We found out during the inquiry that there'd been a considerable amount of this ammunition was of inferior quality, withdrawn from general service.
Most of the massive consignment had been rejected by the Army. Tens of millions of bullets were simply dumped at sea.
This evidence was extremely crucial in relation to the fact that that bullet was relatively rare. It was established that that bullet was not easy to come by.
The assassin had left behind this single clue. But would it be enough to reveal the face behind the mask? In the Orkney Islands, in June 1994, a hooded gunman shot dead a restaurant waiter, the first murder here for 25 years. The killer fled, leaving behind the spent cartridge case. As firearms experts struggled to make sense of their strongest piece of evidence, detectives went through statements provided by the traumatized witnesses.
This was a terrible moment for them. They had to describe the actual shooting, the whole event. A man coming in, shooting the waiter who's serving your young daughter, and his brains being on the table.
The gunman's disguise left little to go on.
This was described as a balaclava, which covered the entire face, so the identification of the individual was nigh on impossible. That said, individuals that were in the restaurant were able to give varying accounts of the way he walked, his build and stature.
It varied from an athletic, fit-looking person to a skinny person to a well-built, muscular person, and height varied.
There was no certainty about the murder weapon either.
In terms of the colour, there were varying descriptions, ranging from silver to black to gunmetal grey.
Everybody saw something different. They described it in a different way.
Was there anything in the victim's past that could explain his murder? Shamsuddin Mahmood was the youngest of 7 sons in a family of 11 children. His eldest brother is a lawyer who lives in London.
He was very amiable and a friendly sort of person, very helpful. He was 20 years younger than me. So he's more like a son to me than brother.
Born in the Bangladeshi capital, Dhaka, a tropical city of 16 million people, Shamsuddin had chosen a place to live which could hardly be more different. He first visited Orkney for a brief holiday, fell in love with the rugged beauty of the islands, and decided to return. With a degree in economics, he had ambitions to study further and become a lawyer.
He was a little over 2 years here in this country at the time of the incident. We wanted him to study here, but for some reason he lost interest in the studies. I don't know why.
Rumours spread that this young man, who seemed too smart for a waiter's job, was on the run from a drugs gang or hiding from the family of a jilted lover.
Establishing a motive was extremely important. There were all sorts of suggestions. Obviously, the manner of Mr. Mahmood's death suggested that it was some kind of hit.
The opinion was that it could have been related to money or drugs, rather than somebody from Orkney could have just gone in and done this.
We couldn't think why it had happened to him. Because as far as we know, he had no enemy. We cannot think of any motives behind it.
His background, his business interests, his social interests were all looked at to establish that motive, but there really wasn't anything there that would have justified such a terrible thing happening to him.
Shamsuddin Mahmood was just what he seemed, an innocent victim. And so the focus returned to the murderer's bullet. Every gun leaves telltale marks on those which it's fired.
When the cartridge case has been ejected from a self-loading pistol, a number of marks will be imparted to it. The first thing we will see is the mark that's made by the firing pin. That can be significant. When the round is ejected, an ejector claw will make a mark. Other marks can be left by the breech face on the gun, and all these different elements can come together to give an indication of the weapon that's fired that round.
Orkney's small police squad was at full stretch, handling the first murder most officers had ever seen. But local officer Eddie Ross, an ex-army sniper, had an expert knowledge of guns and ammunition. During 20 years in the police, he'd served in the special branch, carrying weapons on royal protection duty. He owned 11 guns himself, including 4 9mm pistols, similar to the one used in the killing. He was tasked with checking all the guns on Orkney to see if any could have fired the fatal shot.
I had to collect all the firearms from the people who had 9mm weapons. There was an active pistol and rifle club within Orkney at that time. We tested them, took empty cases from them, and bagged them up so they could be matched. All the weapons came back clear.
As the summer went by on Orkney, police seemed no nearer catching the hooded assassin. But then, in August 1994, there was a startling development.
2.5 months after the murder had occurred, Constable Ross approached the senior investigating officer and told him that he had similar ammunition at his home address.
The man playing a key role in hunting the murderer now admitted he owned ammunition from the same rare ex-British Army batch, identical to the bullet which killed Shamsuddin Mahmood.
When I was going through my own ammunition, there was a box of 9mm, and it bore the same markings as the case that was found in the restaurant.
This kind of ammunition was a main line of inquiry. Constable Ross was asked why he hadn't informed the inquiry team prior to that.
That box of ammunition had lain for quite a number of years, and you just don't, if it's there, it's there, you don't see it, if you understand me. It's only when I was going through the box at a later stage that I pulled it out and realised what it was, the significance of the markings on it in relation to the case that was on the restaurant floor.
Constable Ross's extraordinary admission came as detectives were following up another line of inquiry.
The inquiry team received a report of an unusual sighting in a place called Papdale Woods in Kirkwall, 2 weeks prior to the crime occurring. An individual dressed in almost exactly the same clothing as the person in the restaurant with a gun jumping about in what was described as army or commando manoeuvres. It appeared very strange to the extent that a mother and daughter actually watched this through a set of binoculars and reported that to the police. Some weeks later, they contacted the police to say that they'd seen the person walking around Kirkwall. He was subsequently identified as Michael Ross.
Michael Ross is the son of Constable Eddie Ross. Then aged just 15, a pupil at Kirkwall Grammar School, he was a soldier in the making, a keen member of the local army cadets. So was he the mysterious figure who'd been spotted in the woods 2 weeks before the killing?
When he was initially questioned about it, he denied he had been that individual at Papdale Woods.
First the policeman, and now his son, seemed to have questions to answer about the murder. And so investigators applied for a search warrant.
Our house was searched, I think it was in December, 1994. And obviously, it's a traumatic experience for anyone to have their house searched, let alone someone who's a police officer at the same time.
During the search of Michael Ross's bedroom, there were a number of items recovered. One in particular was a notebook. There were some drawings and writings which could be construed as racist. Certainly some Nazi markings.
There was swastikas in some of his notepads and such like, yeah. I don't think it indicates that you're a racist. I think also he had music posters on his wall for Megadeth and Iron Maiden. And this was made quite a bit of by the police. I didn't think nothing about a swastika being here, there, or whatever. We didn't sit down at the dinner table and talk about stuff like that.
The search turned up another unusual find.
In addition, there was a deactivated 9mm submachine gun given to him by his father. This was indicative of maybe the relationship that Michael and his father seemed to have.
I know people find that a strange gift, but that was our sort of life. Michael had an interest in weapons and military stuff, and it was just a gift.
Gossip began to spread that police were looking at one of their own in connection with the killing. Eddie Ross says that he was looking closely at his son, wondering, had he committed murder?
I was watching, shall we say, because of what was being suggested and alleged for anything I saw that was out of the norm for him. And he was just his normal self. A 15-year-old boy, plain and simple. Certainly not someone who'd walk into a packed restaurant and gun down a young man.
But investigators weren't so confident.
A decision was made that Michael Ross was going to be detained in relation to the murder. He denied the murder, but admitted that it was him that was at Papdale Woods.
Michael Ross now admitted that he had been lurking military style in the woods. He said he was preparing to confront another teenager he'd been feuding with over a girlfriend. But his enemy never showed up.
The individual at Papdale Woods and the man with the gun in the restaurant were dressed in almost identical clothing.
But he told police that, far from committing murder on the night of June the 2nd, he'd been hanging out in Kirkwall with a group of teenage friends.
The individuals that he quoted as seeing said that they hadn't in fact met him at all that night. In terms of an alibi, he presented us with a story which didn't appear to be accurate.
The questions in this extraordinary case were rapidly piling up. Why had the son lied to police? Why had the father apparently withheld a vital piece of evidence? That silence would soon have dramatic consequences. In 1994, on the Orkney Islands, a masked gunman shot dead 27-year-old restaurant waiter Shamsuddin Mahmood. There seemed to be no motive, and at first no clue as to the identity of the hooded assassin. Then suspicions gathered around a father and son. Policeman Eddie Ross and his 15-year-old boy Michael. Orkney, with a population of 20,000 people living on 20 islands, is like a village. Gossip and news travels fast when a well-known local family is implicated in murder. But one of the Ross's neighbours refused to believe they could be involved.
The initial theory of most people was it had been a contract. Possibly drugs, I don't know, but my theory was a contract, and it still is. It's not the type of action, so a young lad just to walk into a restaurant, shoot somebody. No doubt 15-year-old boys have done that type of thing in maybe inner cities, where they grow up with violence. But this was a young lad that grew up in a rural community, never done anything wrong in his life, absolute nonsense.
The initial reaction was that it was an outsider, not somebody from Orkney, that did it. It was almost like Orkney's darkest hour, and people are very, very proud of Orkney and protective of how it's perceived by the world. There's a lot of support for the Ross family, and those who know the family really well are very, very supportive.
The Ross family seemed wrapped up in the military. Michael Ross's only ambition was to be a soldier. Eddie Ross kept 11 guns and piles of ammunition at home. He even gave his son a machine gun to play with.
This was an old deactivated machine gun he just gave Michael. It gives us an ornament. The only way he could kill anybody with is if he hit them over the head with it. They were just a military-type family. But obsessed with guns, no. Interested, very, very interested, but obsessed, no.
Eddie Ross first aroused suspicion by revealing he owned bullets identical to the one used in the murder. As investigators probed further, their suspicions grew. Eddie Ross now admits he was given the ammunition by an old friend, James Spence, an ex-Marine who took it illegally when he left the service.
How we came across it, I can't remember how that was. No, technically he shouldn't have had it either.
At first, he refused to say where the bullets had come from.
I had delayed in telling the superintendent who I'd got the ammunition from, primarily because I wasn't going to really wanted to get the chap involved, because I didn't believe it had any connection directly. And I was interviewed and such like, and apparently there's a conflict in the stories between myself and Mr. Spence.
The key issue was how many bullets James Spence passed over. Was it one box of 35 or two?
Constable Ross produced a sealed box of this ammunition which contained the full amount of bullets that box was supposed to contain. However, Mr. Spence told the inquiry team that he gave a second box, which was opened. That box remains unaccounted for.
It was one box of 9mm, and that's what I've said from day one, and that's what I'm still saying.
But why would James Spence lie about the number of boxes?
I've never said that he was lying, but I do say that he was mistaken in the quantity and ammunition he did give me.
It seemed too much of a coincidence that the rare bullet used in the murder could have come from somewhere else. Investigators, Eddie Ross's own police colleagues, now decided to act. He was charged with hindering the murder investigation. His trial took place in 1997 in the imposing setting of Inverness Castle. If convicted, Eddie Ross knew he faced not just the end of his 20-year police career, but years in jail. The jury was told that, far from there being an innocent mistake over the number of bullets he'd received, Eddie Ross had asked James Spence to lie about the true quantity when he was questioned by detectives. The verdict would depend on whose version of events the jury believed.
When you're sitting there waiting for it, it can go one of two ways. I did not think I would be found guilty, certainly.
But the jury didn't believe Eddie Ross's story.
When I was found guilty, what do you do? I really couldn't answer how I felt. Maybe angry a bit. Not happy, I can tell you.
He was sentenced to 4 years in jail.
On my first few days in there, I was told by them that if I admitted to having committed this crime, I could get released early. I told them where to stick that. I didn't need to admit to them anything, not that I had anything to admit to.
Eddie Ross was released from prison after 2 years. Returning to Orkney, he found a job as an undertaker. At his trial, his son Michael was publicly named as prime suspect for the murder of Shamsuddin Mahmood, though no charges had ever been brought.
It is unusual, Michael Ross, his son, being named as a suspect. However, it would have been argued that Constable Ross's actions centred entirely around the protection of his son.
The cover-up which put Eddie Ross in jail made no sense, unless his son had committed the murder. But Michael Ross remained free. The whole island knew he'd been branded as the restaurant hitman, while he finished his studies at the local grammar school. Police didn't have enough to charge him.
In the intervening period, obviously, new forensic opportunities presented themselves in relation specifically to DNA, and certainly the bullet casing and the bullet were subjected to DNA testing. Unfortunately, that didn't yield any new information. The witness evidence was reviewed over this time, but no further information had come to light. In effect, we had an unsolved murder.
Once he left school, Michael Ross followed the family tradition and applied to join the army. He signed on with his father's old regiment, the Black Watch. Like his father, he would prove to be an expert marksman, soon graduating to the regiment's elite squad of snipers.
It's 10 years since the shooting of a Bangladeshi restaurant waiter in the Orkney.
The shooting on Orkney seemed to be passing into history.
In a court case in 1997,
For more than a decade, the case remained open, but growing colder with each passing year.
There was occasionally, well, not occasionally, quite a lot of times, if something came up in the media, we did have a wee chat about it, but he was in the military by that time, so we didn't really see very much of him.
5 rockets and mortars were fired. The heaviest bombardment the Black Watch has suffered.
As the years passed, Michael Ross was attracting attention for quite different reasons. In 2004, his Black Watch detachment, filmed by a news team, were engaged in several deadly clashes in Iraq.
On one occasion, he was in an armoured vehicle. He was the armoured vehicle commander when a car bomber approached the column, detonated the car bomb. 3 of his colleagues were killed outright.
Michael Ross fired at attackers, then helped the wounded. For this and other incidents, he received commendation and a rare mention in dispatches. The murder suspect was now a war hero, a corporal, married with 2 young children, and a glittering career ahead of him. It was in 2006, 12 years after the restaurant shooting, that the case took a dramatic turn.
It was a bolt out of the blue. A gentleman had walked into Kirkwall Police Station with an anonymous letter indicating that he saw the person responsible for shooting this Indian gentleman, and it all sort of kicked off from there.
The letter writer was 51-year-old Willie Grant, born and bred on Orkney, and he said someone who'd kept a terrible secret for 12 years. He described how he'd left a local pub on the evening of June the 2nd, 1994, and stopped at the public toilets roughly 100 yards from the Indian restaurant.
He became aware of rustling noises within one of the cubicles that was locked. The cubicle door was opened and an individual walked out he identified as Michael Ross, holding a semi-automatic handgun.
I thought, you know, who the hell is this guy? Why and how could you wait 12 years before coming forward with such information?
It did seem extraordinary that he would have this kind of information and not come forward with it.
If he waited 12 years, why not wait the remainder of his life and go to his grave with it?
He basically said that he did not want to be the person that everybody would point to and say, it's because of you that this individual has been convicted. I think there was an element of fear as well.
For prosecutors, Willie Grant's letter was the final piece of the puzzle they'd struggled with for 12 years. Michael Ross was charged with murder, and a trial date set for 2008 at Glasgow High Court. But despite the gravity of the charge, Michael Ross, now aged 29, wasn't kept in custody. He walked to and from the court each day, a free man.
It was just a really strange situation to follow him in, and he'd open the door for you and he'd go into his part of the court and you'd go into yours. Then he'd be sitting just a few feet away. He was very relaxed. He didn't really show any emotion or particular even interest. He was just very, very self-controlled and relaxed.
Michael Ross didn't give evidence himself. Instead, he listened as the prosecution repeated the scenario described at his father's trial 11 years earlier. How Eddie Ross had first concealed, then lied about the number of bullets he'd been given. To establish a motive, the prosecution produced witnesses who described schoolboy Michael Ross making racist remarks, saying immigrants should be shot. It was claimed that Shamsuddin Mahmood was targeted purely because of his race. But for the defense, army officers told how some of Michael Ross's best pals among the squaddies were black. His military record was exemplary.
Some people thought he'd done it, some people thought he hadn't done it, but everybody thought he probably wouldn't be found guilty of it. There wasn't any hard evidence that placed him there. But of course, with Scottish verdicts, you also have, apart from guilty and not guilty, you have a not proven verdict. I think in our heart of hearts, we all felt that that was probably what would happen.
The jury had to decide, was Michael Ross a hero who'd suffered 14 years of cruel gossip? Or a racist and coward who could gun down an innocent man? In 2008, 14 years after the shooting of Bangladeshi waiter Shamsuddin Mahmood, soldier Michael Ross stood accused of his murder. After a trial lasting 6 weeks, the verdict was returned.
We find the defendant guilty.
We were absolutely astonished. It wasn't until that moment that I realised that I really, really didn't think he was going to be convicted.
The drama was not yet over.
Michael Ross suddenly leapt over the dock and raced across the courtroom towards where the jury were. And they were all... He managed to get a long way down the corridor towards the fire exit before somebody threw themselves on top of him.
As a serviceman, if you're in a sticky situation, you use escape and evasion tactics. Speaking to Michael afterwards, all he said to me was just gonna head for the hills.
With Michael Ross safely locked up, another of his secrets now came to light. Police were called to this Glasgow superstore car park, not far from the court buildings, to investigate a hire car left apparently abandoned for nearly a week. In the boot, they found a rucksack with army survival equipment, but also 3 hand grenades and a loaded machine gun. Michael Ross had rented the car and put it in position should he need to escape. It's now known that he'd smuggled the machine gun back from army duties in Kosovo in 1999, hidden in the back of a TV set.
This is a Czechoslovakian-made Scorpion machine pistol. It's capable of firing at a rate of 840 rounds a minute. And so at close range, it's quite devastating.
I knew nothing about that until sometime later, when it became apparent that he had this stuff in a car. Now, he had never mentioned anything to me in relation to that. I do not believe, regardless of what he had in his car, that he was intending to do anything other than look after himself.
But hand grenades and a machine gun are designed to kill. Aren't they evidence enough that Michael Ross is a calculating criminal, rather than the innocent man he still claims to be?
As far as I see, it's got nothing to do with the actual case against him. He certainly knows he made a mistake. And had I known that such a thing was to occur, I would certainly have turned him the other way, as it were.
Michael Ross received a minimum 25-year sentence for the murder and escape plot. Yet both he and his father say they're innocent. His supporters claim the case was fabricated by police to clear up one of Britain's most notorious race hate crimes, a claim flatly rejected at the trial.
He could see it happening. Experienced in years in the police, he could see what was going on. He said the way they're presenting things, if I was a member of the jury, I would find myself guilty.
The Ross family still commands support from many on Orkney. A local businessman is offering £100,000 for information to catch what they call the real killer. This is the first time that Eddie Ross has spoken in depth on camera. 2 juries decided he was lying, but he stands by his original story.
I mean, in relation to the ammunition thing, I've had people say to me, why did you hand it in? Why did you not ditch it? I thought I was helping. I will reiterate, I had only the 1 box of 9mm ammunition.
In 2012, judges turned down Michael Ross's appeal, saying the conviction was safe. So does he believe there's been a miscarriage of justice?
The escape kit lying in the boot of the car, you don't pre-plan something like that if you think that you are genuinely innocent. Grenades and a machine gun are not the sort of thing that very, very useful when it comes to living off the land. The idea that he was prepared to go out in a hail of gunfire would belie the idea that he was just an innocent person who could never have done that. We're just completely and utterly blinkering ourselves if we consider that route.
But how likely is it that a teenager can become a cool and efficient hitman?
The idea that Michael would be too naive as a 15-year-old to be so careful and forensically aware belies the idea that his military mindset and careful precision in carrying this out were all evident in his childhood and his upbringing. To take it one step further, when it comes to a profession which shows a lack of interpersonal consideration for others, being a sniper is probably second only to an executioner, because in both cases, your only purpose in life is to actually kill other human beings.
On Orkney, sympathy for Eddie Ross stems from the fact that he's also paid a heavy price for his son's crime.
In this case, you've got the father who actually has committed a crime to support his son. I get the idea of duty here. I get the idea of protection. But in this case, it has reached an extreme proportion.
A once close-knit family has been shamed and shattered.
How is Michael dealing with this?
Himself, he's fine. He's physically and mentally. He's quite a laid-back chap. He gets on well with the staff and inmates and such like. He's married with I mean, he has 2 young girls. They're growing up. And I don't need to explain what that's about.
Michael Ross will be in his mid-50s when he regains his freedom. By that time, Shamsuddin Mahmood would have been nearing 70, a full life behind him. Instead, he was murdered. As Shamsuddin's family have had to accept for no other reason than the color of his skin.
It was purely racist attack. If someone else was there at that time, probably he would be assassinated. We lost our brother. Whatever will happen, we won't get him back. So we had to come to terms with the fact that we lost him.